Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What can we learn from the dying? What is it like to watch someone die? Do they die?
Well, I know that right now because we're both dying. So welcome to the 380th edition of Behind the Paranormal.
385th.
Yeah, that's what it says.
No, they said 380th, sorry.
No, 385th. That's what I said. No.
Can't hear either. All right.
No. Anyway, we're back from our European adventure, only to be faced with my dad asking those questions and asking if I said 85th or 80th. All right, so, but before we welcome our guests to answer those questions, let's pick up on our last contest question, which I skipped over last week because I couldn't remember it. We're going back 3 weeks to the last live show we did before we left for Europe. The question was, in the movie The Mothman Prophecies, Indrid Cold reads the mind of reporter John Klein and tells him where his father was born. What was the name of the city?
Well, the first to get that one right was Shira Krakowski of Canton, Ohio, and the answer was Racine, Wisconsin. Actually, now that I think about it, there is an inaccuracy in that question because I wrote the question. In the film, Indrid Cold says that he doesn't need to read Klein's mind to know the answer. Interesting. Shades of multiversal unity, right?
Indeed. So this week's question is, in what U.S. state and county did the so-called Bell Witch incidents occur? Get that right and win a copy of Transitions, a nurse's education about life and death by tonight's guest. We do welcome callers this evening, so the numbers are locally or from Canada, 401-766-1240. Again, that's 401-766-1240. And from anywhere in the U.S., the number is 401...
Oh, no, 800. I'm sorry. That's another mistake. 800-449-1240.
Oh, yep, there we go.
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome. It's all good, so take it away.
Rebecca Hawkins, who writes under the name Becki Hawkins, who has sat by the bedsides of seriously or terminally ill patients for more than 30 years as an oncology and hospice nurse. Oncology, of course, means referring to cancer and the treatment thereof. Beginning her nursing career at age 19, she chose to start in oncology, in the oncology unit, I should say, in a large city hospital. She progressed to outpatient oncology, hospice, and eventually became a hospice chaplain. Upon retiring in the 1990s, Becki volunteered to serve hospice patients. She began writing her experiences as one way to help deal with the emotional impact of working with terminally ill patients. Among other things, this resulted in a nationally syndicated column, Beyond Statistics, and her eventual book, Transitions, a Nurse's Education about Life and Death. We'll talk about all Becki's work, but especially her witnessing of near-death experiences and other phenomena associated with the dying and their transition. Becki's website is www.ladyhawkpublishing.com. ladyhawkpublishing.com, one word.
All right. So, Becki Hawkins, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you so much, guys. It's a real treat to be here with you.
Oh, well, it's great to have you. So let's kick this off. And one question that comes to mind right away is why, at the age of 19, would you choose to start working with terminally ill patients?
I was just impressed with the idea of getting to be with people who were in that critical time and trying to be present to them and helping them through that time. When I first started working right out of nursing school in oncology, we had everything from people just being diagnosed to people in with treatments, people getting maybe antibiotics because their white counts had been too low from the chemo. So there was a variety of things going on. But we also had the people that were hospice patients because hospice 1980 wasn't up and running in that area at that time. But those were the patients, yes, that I felt most comfortable with in trying to be with them and the ones I was blessed to be with. And whenever they did open their first hospice, I did see their first hospice patient. And that's where I really resonated with getting to be with people and meet the cat and the dog and the grandchildren or the spouse. You get to meet so many of the family members, neighbors, friends. They drag out the wedding pictures, and you hear stories. And that's what blessed me, was getting the whole picture and being a part of the whole process.
Okay.
I kind of thought of myself as like a midwife to the other side.
Right, yeah, well, that's actually the title of the show. When did you start, quote, learning from the dying?
I think you learn right off the bat, but I don't think I fully grasped it. You really, really got it until many years later, and as I was writing and writing and writing, and then started putting this book together last year. And I would come across my journaling and these columns that I had written for this newspaper, and I would think, oh, my gosh, what a wonderful lesson this person gave me, and I was so young at the time. I don't know if I fully could get it, until later. Now, I'm in my 60s now, so now it means even more to me to go back and pick up where I had written about what someone was trying to teach me and educate me about.
Okay. What was the first, what we might call paranormal experience you had with someone who was dying?
That was when I was taking care of a hospice patient who was a precious little Pentecostal minister. And he was dying from the effects of radiation and chemo that he had received many years before. Okay, so, this is 1980s and way before, in the 70s, early 70s. So you can imagine how rough that was, the chemo then, the radiation then. So his heart and lungs were failing. And I went in to see him and visit him with his wife and tried to explain to them all about hospice, and she was frightened of it, but he was ready to hear. He was not afraid to die. So he and I formed a bond. Well, yes, I got the call one day from the wife. I think he's passing. Can you hurry? Can you get here? I tried to reassure her and comfort her and told her to go get the neighbor, to sit with her until I arrived, and that I would be there as soon as I could and try to remember what I had shared with her. When I arrived, the neighbor ran home, and she ran back into the kitchen, the wife, and this precious, sweet patient of mine was sitting there in the living room just as blue as he could be because he was not getting good air. And he was in his recliner, and he said, Becki, can you get me to my bed? And I said, yes. I picked him up, I carried him to his bed, and set him straight up. And I sat behind him, I straddled him, and I had my fingertips on his shoulder.
So could you speak up just a little bit? You're kind of fading. Okay.
I'm sorry. And he tapped my fingertips, and he said, Becki, can you see them? And I said, no. I said, tell me what you're seeing. And he said, Becki, the room is full now of angels, and I must go. And he was looking all around the ceiling, and trying to, it was as if he was trying to take it all in. And then he immediately said, oh, I have to go. And he called out to his wife, and he said, Annie, I have to go. I love you. And he raised up his right arm and was reaching towards the ceiling, and he said, oh, my Lord. And then he fell back against me, and he was gone. People, tried to tell me that he wasn't getting enough oxygen, and I said, this man was not receiving any kind of pain medicine or anything, and clearly, he was telling me what he was seeing, and I believe it.
Okay.
Well, that's very that's really interesting. But can you give some other examples of experiences you've had with people dying?
Well, yes. There are people that have told me about pre-death visions. Yes, I've been with, several people, as you can imagine, over 30 years. And one particular person that I was with was talking to me one day, and he said, my mother has been coming to visit me. And I said, your mother? I said, my gosh, you're in your 80s. How old is your mother? And he said, Becki, my mother's been gone for 10 years. He said, this woman is coming to me and sitting over there in the corner, and she's been talking to me. And I said, well, what is she saying? He said, well, she's telling me that she's going to assist me in my passing. She is coming to be with me as I'm going to cross over. And he said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I think she's probably decided to give you that escort. I said, just listen to her and be with her, and then when that time comes, I think it'll be good. And he said, yes, I think you're right. The next day I went to check on him, and he was gone. There are just so many of these patients that will tell you, some of them as they're passing, you know, they will start talking to you about, oh my, do you see that? Do you see that light? Do you hear that music? Can you? There's my family right there. Do you see them? They're right out that window right there, and they will, you know, tell you what they're seeing and feeling, or what, you know, the fragrances they're smelling, the music they're hearing, or they'll just be overwhelmed with this feeling of love, and they will tell you, oh my, it's just so beautiful. It's just so bright, and then they're gone.
Yeah. Dr. Michael Persinger has been on the show, and he has been able to simulate these things in a laboratory by means of electrodes. But much to our surprise, he admitted that and agreed with us that does not mean it's not real.
Right.
You know, and if I might share and get your thoughts on a couple of my own experiences with the dying when I worked, then because this goes back to the 70s, when I was a student for the priesthood and also a graduate student in psychology, working in psychiatric hospitals, which at the time had more inpatients than they do today, and had a number of elderly people who also had physical maladies as well as the psychiatric problems, or at least the perceived psychiatric problems. There was one at Ogdensburg State Hospital in New York State when I was in the seminary there, and I've mentioned this on the air several times, and people were quite taken by it, that we had an Irish fellow of Irish descent who was paralyzed from the neck down and was naturally in bed, was probably on his last day in this realm, and was surrounded by certainly me, and there was a priest and several doctors, or I should say one doctor and several nurses. And he, all of a sudden, sat up in bed, which he couldn't physically do, had the most magnificently beautiful look on his face, and said, Abba, Ba, which is Hebrew for, it's a very intimate form of father. Abba is Daddy is coming. And then he dropped back, and he was gone. And we all just looked at each other, and there was a beautiful feeling in the room of warmth. And again, I mean, he physically could not have risen like that, just physically, never mind the rest of it.
Yes.
There was another occasion at that hospital, the same year, as a matter of fact, when I was simply walking down the hall into the room of a patient. No one else was in there. And I swear, and I'm not the sort of person who imagines things, but 42 years in the paranormal, it's, work, it's kind of, you see it's just about everything at least once, but there was it looked like a mist over this man's bed, and there was a hand pulling back into this mist. Yes. And I just caught sight of it for a second. Maybe I imagined it, I don't know. But he had just passed as I walked in. And then everybody came running, but it was just at that very moment. There was another occasion, this is at Norwood State Hospital in Connecticut, in which, it was in the summer, I was doing some work there. There was a man, I should say a woman, who was lying there, and she was in the process of passing. And everything on the shelves around the room and the table started to shake. Wow. And that one of the things you look for, of course, to see whether something is paranormal is something occurring beyond the reach of the person who may be causing it or with whom it is associated or something like that. And that was really strange. So, I mean, what say you? Have you experienced things like that, or what? Is this normal for or what?
This is not uncommon, and I totally believe you. You're not making that up. You're not.
No, I'll never forget
when
it.
When someone sits up that's been paralyzed and is speaking, what a gift for you to be witnessing that.
Absolutely.
And to be experiencing that. And don't ever let anybody try to tell you any different. You can just say, well, thank you. But you know in your heart that what you saw was real, just like those other experiences. And that's a true gift. You're a very special soul to be able to see that, because people like me, I'm with it all the time, and I have never seen anything like seeing their form rise or the mist or anything. I don't know if there's something wrong with me.
Oh no, it's just that I don't think it's that common, but you have seen the near-death experiences and the pre.
Yes, these people will tell you. There was a lady that had been in a coma for a long time, and the doctor said, "Okay, her organs are failing. We need to get the family in here. The family's around the bed, and she has barely, you can barely feel a pulse. And all of a sudden, this woman who's been in coma for quite a while, just like your patient, sits straight up in bed and reaches towards the end of the bed and calls out her daughter's name that had passed as a young child at about 8 or 10 years old, and then laid back down and was gone."
Mm-hmm.
And so, that just doesn't happen, by accident. People that have been in a coma a long time don't normally sit straight up and reach towards the end of the bed. So that whole family was just so blessed and just so astounded, because they knew what was happening, because they knew this was their family member she was reaching out to and calling to. And for them to get to witness that, too, that was huge. My brother had a near-death experience just months before he died. And he was a tough welder, worked all over the United States, was not spiritual in any sense or, religious in any sense. And he had lung cancer, and these tumors were wrapped around his aorta and in his lungs and everywhere. And we just hadn't got to the oncologist yet for the appointment, for that very first appointment. And he was feeling feverish and bad, and he said, I just feel kind of, and I said, do you want me to take you to the ER? And he said, no, let me just sit here for a while and let me see if I do better. And so I went home. I said, call me if you need me. Well, lo and behold, he calls me, and all I hear is gasping. So I said, I'm on my way. I hung up. I called our dad, who was in a different part of the house. I said, get into him and shake him, hold him up. He may have some kind of occlusion going on, Get in there to him, some obstruction, something's going on. Called the ambulance. Took me 20 minutes to get there. I get there. Well, the ambulance is there. My brother is blue. He's breathing, but he's barely breathing. Okay, get him to the hospital. He's in the hospital 10 days. Start the radiation. Start the chemo. All this stuff. And with radiation, you got to go every day. So we're into now traveling back to Tulsa every day for radiation. And a couple of days after that, he taps me on the shoulder while I'm driving. I about died at the house that night. And I looked at him and I said, well, no kidding. I said, you were purple when I got there. And he said, no, you don't. You're not listening to me. I about died. I said, oh, my. Okay. What did you see? Our mother, who had passed in 2002 and had been gone, approached him. He said, I was choking, and then all of a sudden, I'm out of my body. And I'm up above, and he doesn't even talk like that at all. Okay, out of his body, he's in this wonderful area where there's lots of light, lots of peace, lots of love. He's not choking anymore. Our mother is approaching him on his left. And on his right is a friend of his who had committed suicide a year before.
Interesting.
And they're on each side of him. And he knows what's happening. And he said, please, 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 give me just a little bit more time. And all of a sudden, my mother said to him, then breathe, son, breathe. And he was back in his body. Well, when I was growing up, they used to tell us all kinds of stuff. And one of the things they told us was, dying people, people that commit suicide go to hell. Well, number one, I don't believe in hell anymore. Number two, you can't tell me that anymore, because this precious soul, who was a good friend of my brother's, showed up because of my brother's near-death experience and gave him that knowledge. It meant the world to him because he was able to see him and know that that wasn't true. He didn't have to think about that anymore, ever. And that my mother, who had been gone, and they were so close, had come to his side. And he knew she was okay and that she was in a good place, too. He was able to carry on until he passed later.
That's an interesting point about suicides. We were going to bring that up because it's an important point. But Ben has a question first.
Yeah, this may seem really like an obvious question. It's like a little 5-year-old kid asking his parents this, but it kind of really isn't that obvious. What exactly is dying?
Okay, dying is when the person is actively losing a vital function. You know, when the first organ that's vital to keeping you alive starts to fail. You know, if it's a cardiac situation that you've been through, you know, your heart is failing and your heart stops. When your lungs have been the number one culprit in the deal from whatever, emphysema, lung cancer, whatever, and you quit breathing. Or if your liver fails, you know, or your kidneys fail, you know, whatever major organ stops functioning, and then all the other organs as well begin to stop. You know, everything starts breaking down and shutting down and quitting because they're not getting what they need from that other vital organ. And the dying process happens, I believe, when all of that begins to shut down and that spirit rises above and sometimes hovers for a while, as I'm sure you've been told before or witnessed yourself, as that person is beginning to leave, you know, the true person, the true essence of who we are, is leaving that clay vessel. The dying part is when it's all over. The death is when everything has totally stopped. And your precious spiritual part of you, that part of you that's the who we are, has started to move forward.
Okay. Our point of view, I don't know if I should say it's a little different or a lot different or goes farther. Most people, we're voices crying in the wilderness. Most people express it the way you have. And again, you've seen it more than we have. However, we have a philosophical problem with Western dualism, with dividing the soul from the body. We don't think that can be done. You are not you without your body, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people who think in the, I suppose, more Eastern manner. That being said, I wanted to get your reaction to this. Now, in my experience, bodily death has two purposes. One, it shifts our consciousness to a life we are already living in the most easily accessible parallel universe. Okay? A life that is part of our subconscious already. Two, it is God's way or nature's way or what have you of avoiding the most deadly of all conditions for the human mind and soul, boredom. That's why we don't live forever. Or actually, we do live forever, but not always in the same conscious life.
Right.
What say you?
Well, I don't think that's that different. I think, the bodily part, what I'm talking about is the flesh part. The part that decays, the part that you bury, or cremate.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
But yes, the you part, the part that you, yes, I believe that. I don't think it's that different from what we're saying. Maybe I'm just not saying it,
Well, see, the point is that, again, in the multiverse awareness, being aware of all the lives, if you accept that multiple worlds interpretation of quantum physics and the implications of that for us, you always have a body somewhere, somewhen. It's all simultaneous, and I don't even believe in the death of the body. I don't believe it.
there are. I only believe in the death of the body that I see that dies.
I hear, yeah, well, the leaf falls off the tree, but you're the whole tree. Now, that kind of thing. So I guess I see what you're saying, and I hope you see what I'm saying. Maybe we're just... See, our language, as I always say, is not quite up to actually talking about these things. So that's the thing.
But I do believe, Anita Morjani's book, Dying to Me, I love that because she says that when she had her near-death experience, and this girl was dead and had her near-death experience, and she said she... people talk about past lives and all this. She said what she saw or experienced, that it was all happening at the same time.
Right, that's what we're saying, yeah.
Yeah. And, I get that. I fully believe her in what she was saying. But, what amazes me, and you guys have probably come across this too, all these people that I have, that come to me all the time, I want you to tell my story, with their near-death experiences, they don't care if anybody believes them.
Right.
They love just sharing the story.
That's the way I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a commercial break here. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, our Monday drive time edition on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com. And New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our guest, Becki Hawkins, in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Lou Mandeville here, and if you like your morning sports with a little bit of an edge, then you'll love my sports reports on the Morning Fun Show with Dave Richards and Joe Callahan. All things old become new again, including my sports reports on the Morning Fun Show, Monday through Friday on your station for local sports, ON 1240.
And we wanted to tell you about Amazon Kindle Fire, now in a 7-inch LCD display, Wi-Fi, 8 gigabytes of memory, download all kinds of publications, millions of applications, publications, movies, everything you can imagine.
That's the new thing. I couldn't remember it.
That's right, the all-new Kindle Fire. It's got a faster processor, twice the memory, longer battery life. The thin, light, and durable design is perfect for entertainment on the go, so you can enjoy movies, again, TV shows, songs, magazines, books, apps, and just about everything else.
Yeah, and Christmas is coming up, so don't forget about that.
Christmas time is coming near, so it's time to get your Kindle. Check it out, Amazon.com or at Staples.
So, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal. We're still here with you, live, coming from WOON 1240 AM with our wonderful guest, Becki Hawkins. And it's definitely been a very interesting show, so let's just kick right off where we left off, which was philosophical differences.
Okay. All right. Well, let me, speaking of differences, Ben, I wanted to ask Becki about this. Becki, have you noticed a difference and this may seem like a stupid question because people who don't come back after near-death experience, how could they tell you about it? But yeah, they do. Anyone who has talked about it or pre-death visions, this kind of thing, do you notice a difference in people who come back or are resuscitated, and between them, what they see, and between those who do not, and maybe have talked about it before? You understand what I'm saying? Yes.
And I tell you what the biggest difference is. These people are not afraid of death.
Oh, when they come back. Oh, sure. Yeah, I've seen the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. They are. I had one lady that I was taking care of that. She had been resuscitated 3 times in the hospital in ICU. She was 80-some years old, and every time her heart quit, they would, do the CPR and everything and bring her back. And so when I went to see her as a hospice patient, that was the very first thing she wanted me to understand. Don't you dare try to do any kind of heroic measures on me if my heart quits. I'm in my 80s. I've been to the Heaven's Gate, is what she called it, 3 times, just entering in, and somebody will shock me and bring me back, and I'm just beginning to experience all that beauty, all that light, all that love, and bam, they bring me back. She said, if you do that to me, I'll haunt you whenever I do get to die.
I threaten my kids with that if they get rid of my library, and I say I know just how to do it.
Then again, I'm glad that I don't subscribe to spiritualism.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go a little deeper here, Becki. We've dealt with the warm and fuzzy, so to speak, not to speak cynically about it. But there is a statistic, and I have encountered people who might back this up. that about 1 in 5 people have a negative experience of the near-death experience. And I know that you don't pass yourself off as an expert in near-death experiences, but an experiencer of those who have experienced them. And that's kind of what we do.
I feel like expertise comes from experience.
It does. That's why, we say, we're not physicists, but our experience of the paranormal seems to indicate that that's the right approach. Anyway, so what I had sort of wanted to ask was, how do I put this?
Did I have any that had a different experience besides the pleasant?
Yeah. Have you encountered anyone who has had a negative near-death experience?
No.
Never?
But,
okay.
No, but look where I am. I'm in the Bible Belt, northeast Oklahoma, and I don't know if that just is because most of my patients were, most of them, not all of them, but most of them were pretty involved with their churches. They were okay with their faith. They were, So I don't know if that's what made the difference or not. But people ask me that all the time. Did you ever have anyone that talked about hell? Did you ever tell anyone that talked about? And I said, no. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people that don't have negative experiences.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting because we always say that you sort of make your own bed in the multiverse. In other words, where your consciousness wakes up, or where the subconscious becomes conscious in whatever realm, then it could be heaven or hell, depending on sort of the bed you've made, so to speak. One of the things too, there was, and we're stealing a story here from our good friend George Nuri on Coast to Coast, who happened to pick this up. He had a guest. I guess Nancy Evans Bush, who is an expert in NDEs, and she was saying that she herself had a very negative experience in the early 1960s. She said she saw black and white circles that began telepathically communicating to her, and this is a new one on me, too. Their message to her was, you don't exist, and you never did exist. Your life was a joke, Earth was a joke, and you were all allowed to believe it was real, but it was never real, and this is just where it is, just this big empty space, unquote. She was very upset by this, naturally, and she was so interested in the experience, on the other hand, that she began to work with an organization that studies NDEs. Now, I've never heard anything quite like this, but I have heard it in other contexts. People being communicated with by alleged spirits or alleged ghosts and things, discouraging them, telling them negative things, upsetting them, making them angry or frightened. And we find that those are, I suppose, what you might call in the Bible Belt false spirits. We call them parasites because they feed upon things like this. They're life forms like any other. And we encounter them all the time. So whatever these might be, this was one of the stranger NDE experiences I had heard about. So I might ask you, what is the strangest NDE that you've encountered? And certainly comment on what I just said, too, if you want.
Well, there again, just like you said, I'm certainly no expert, and there certainly are many that could answer much better than I. And I've read, several things about near-death experiences whenever I was trying to figure out what was going on with what I was experiencing with these people. And from what I've read, there are people that have these experiences because, maybe they weren't ready to move forward, or maybe there were people that have had such trauma in their lives, and negativity, and drugs, and all these other kind of things, and that they're afraid to move forward, and that they move more towards the shame and the guilt and the negativity of whatever. Souls that are troubled and are on a lower level, but not necessarily what we grew up with in the definition of hell.
Mm-hmm.
I can say to you, I don't have a clue about that. I honestly can say I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something I've experienced or witnessed or anything. But I'm not someone to say that just because of what I've experienced, that's all there is or seen. or witness with these people.
Sure, yeah.
But I had one little fellow that was in a psychiatric ward, and everybody thought he was crazy. And they asked me to take care of him, and because he was getting ready to have surgery the next day, and he has lung cancer, and he said,
Good heavens.
He was just ranting and raving and carrying on about, I'm going to heaven tomorrow, saints protect us, and just, he was a manic depressive and just running around all over the place, and it was hard for me to even keep up with him. And he was just always exclaiming all kinds of things like, give all your money to Oral Roberts, give all your money to God, all this stuff. Well, he was in this ward where there were 8 beds, and one of his roommates came in, and he was a paranoid schizophrenic. And my patient said to him, hey, where you been, buddy? What are you doing? What's going on? But, he didn't want to hear that. And so he walked over to my patient and just hit him with his fist right between the eyes. So I crawled under the bed, and my patient was screaming, help, help. And they came in, they carried off this guy, and my poor little patient said, oh, thank God, the Lord is with us. Give all your money to Oral Roberts. Well, they're just thinking, okay, he's nuts. The next day he goes for surgery. I went in to pray with him the day before, that morning before. And I went back to school. I came back to see him after, and he was gone. He died from surgery.
Yeah.
And I'm going, maybe people aren't always crazy like we define them whenever they're trying to tell us what they already know.
That's exactly.
Made me rethink, what's crazy, what's not crazy.
That's exactly the experience I had in psych wards. I rather quickly, first I had a lot of weird things happen. I never had anything quite that exciting. But of course, again, you were an employee. I was an occasional visitor for pastoral reasons, but it was very early on. I was an undergraduate still when I really began to wonder, are these people really crazy? Are they experiencing chemical imbalances or these sorts of things that we commonly associate these psychoses or alleged psychoses with, or are they experiencing worlds that really exist?
Yeah,
some of which are horrible.
Another level that we can't even access.
Exactly, and that we're only just finding out about, or at least rediscovering. I think our remote ancestors knew about it.
Right.
So that's a very, very good point. And I ran into exactly the same sorts of things. There were many times when I would be dealing with schizophrenics, and they would look me in the eye with the most knowing looks. They would describe events from history in the most articulate manner I had ever heard. More so than some of my professors would do. Yeah. As if they had been there. And all this sort of feeding into my later opinions that we really are there and parallel lives and all this kind of thing, and it's one big reality. But whether that's true or not, it was an amazing experience. So, Ben.
So let's move on. So, Becki, do you ever think you are receiving messages from people that have passed?
Just so funny that you should ask that. I was just marking here on my paper that I had prepared for you guys. I went to visit my husband's uncle's wife before my trip to Arizona last year. She was dying with brain cancer. And as I was visiting her, her family said, don't say anything too spiritual to her. She's not religious. And I said, oh, okay. So I just was hanging out with her, and I was telling her that, that her angels would be with her. I whispered it so nobody would hear. I said, your angels are going to be with you. You're going to be okay through this passing. Don't be afraid. You're going to be all right. It's going to be okay. And she looked at me and squeezed my hand. I went on to Sedona, got a call that on my way that she had passed. And then after I got there, I went to see this spiritual counselor that I go see every year when I'm out there. So she said, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I don't know. Let's talk about my book. And she goes, wait a minute. There's somebody behind me, white curly hair. She's jumping up and down. She's so excited. Tell her thank you for helping me cross over. Tell her thank you. I've made it. I made it. Tell them. Go back and tell all of them. It's okay. I made it.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, do you know who that is? And I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't know. And she goes, no, Becki, this is recent. And it hit me. was my husband's uncle's wife. And she was the one that was so afraid because she hadn't been religious that she wasn't going to make it. And there she came. She saw me, and she spoke to me through this woman. That has never happened to me before. And to receive that was such a blessing and such a gift. If people believe me, that's great. If they don't believe me, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It was a blessing to me and a gift to me.
I can see that. Yeah, we're always very, very skeptical about that sort of thing because there's so much false information and so many dangers in that. But when you receive it from someone who you've been close to and you just know it's them, then I'd say that starts to add legitimacy. I was going to ask you about suicides, as we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
As our longtime listeners know, and it was always very difficult for me to talk about this, I first became interested in the paranormal when I was, I suppose, when I witnessed my own father's suicide. And that probably was a defining moment in my life, as you can imagine. Later on, when I was studying for the priesthood, I began to wonder about the things we were taught, of course, not in the seminary, but by the nuns early on, God bless them. But that, you did something like that, you went to hell. And I couldn't reconcile that with the wonderful man that my father was.
Right.
Particularly there were medical difficulties that probably led to the act. But in any case, where's my father? What happened? How does it work? And that was the origin of my own interest. And later on in the seminary, when I had resources to consult theological experts and things of this kind, who were very reticent to talk about this. And, as a matter of fact, I eventually got myself thrown out about a year before ordination because they didn't like what I was researching and where it was going. Anyway, all that being said, in your own experience with suicides, I was very interesting that you mentioned one was mentioned by one of the dying patients in his or her vision that there was someone who had committed suicide. I have found with suicides that they, following the you make your own bed kind of thing, that ones I have encountered have ended up in worlds of endless aloneness. It's kind of like be careful what you wish for, and I've always thought of suicide as the ultimate act of selfishness in this, in this society anyway, and I've seen them end up in worlds of endless aloneness. On the other hand, my own father, who was a suicide, has been very present to me for all these years. So, what say you? What's your experience with those who commit suicide and the kinds of experiences they have, or even if they're brought back or whatever?
Okay, well, see, that was my only experience as far as definitely being involved in the storytelling of my brother sharing about his good friend, which my brother wouldn't even mention anything like that, religious or spiritual or anything. So I definitely believed him. And what was so precious to me was him speaking of his friend's appearance to him and being so tender to him and being so helping to him. And from what I have read, and there's a lot out there, but what I have read is that, yes, there are some people that are so despondent and so guilt-ridden, over committing suicide, that they're having a hard time releasing that and moving forward and moving up. Where other people, there are definitely people that did not see any other way out. They could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. And there are people that have been mentally confused, emotionally distraught, that have committed suicide. So when people speak to me about this, about, is my brother lost, is my sister lost, is my mother lost, I say, no. I don't believe that. I believe that they have crossed over, or however you guys want to say it too, and that they are, I think we're in different levels from what I read, and some of us are at a level where we need to know healing and peace. A lot of people that have committed suicide are wounded in their hearts and their spirits for some reason that maybe we don't even know about. Or it could be that we know, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental. So I always try to encourage people, don't judge that. You don't know sometimes. You may think you know, but you may not truly know everything that was in the multiple layers of all the things that was going on with this person.
Yeah.
their lifetime.
I want to get your thoughts on this. It's commonly assumed or thought in the medical world, officially at least, that the near-death experience in particular and the death experience in general involves all sorts of neurons firing haphazardly in the brain and producing these images or these thoughts or pictures. What say you on that?
Well, here's the thing, and I know you know this because you've studied this enough. There are too many incidents. There are too many people that have come forward that are sharing their experiences that are telling us almost exactly the same thing. I can't believe that if that was all there was to it, that these people would be telling us what they are seeing, smelling, experiencing, returning back to share with us. No. If science wants to believe that, okay. But,
Well, Ben and I, we tend to agree. In the language of science itself, we have the phenomenon. If you believe in evolution in any of the common forms in which it is believed, then everything that has developed within us, every trait, every physical trait, every psychological trait, has survival value. All our instincts. So what is the survival value of a near-death experience? How did that develop? Why is it almost universal, cross-cultural, and all this sort of thing? If it has if your body's just dying and that's all there is to it, there must be some survival value, some reason why it was put into us. So that to me lends legitimacy to the entire experience.
Yes.
Okay.
This friend of mine shared with me last year because she knew I was putting this book together. I had been with her while her husband was passing, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I need to tell you about my near-death experience when I was a little girl." And so my husband and I went one evening and sat with her and listened to her. And when she was 4 years old, she had polio. And this woman was in her 70s when she told me this. 4 years old, she had polio, and she was in a hospital. And, back then they had long wards, with people coming up and down, all these beds lined up with these children with polio.
Those.
And she could not breathe well. She was in horrific pain, just feeling really bad. She said her dad was at her side. And she said all of a sudden she was out of her little body, and she was rising above. And she could see the nuns. It was a Catholic hospital. The nuns running back and forth up and down the corridor. And she could see their frantic and their concern. She said, but she was so involved with this wonderful feeling that she had not known for a very long time of being totally free of pain and feeling all this warmth and love and immense joy that she just was rolling around like being bathed in it and felt so good. But noticed her dad's concern and the nun's concern, and all of a sudden she was back in her little body with all that pain and everything. And she tried moments later to convey this to her dad, and he said, no, don't speak of that. You were just having a dream. And she said she kept it within her until many years later, when the very first near-death experiences, Raymond Moody's first book, all of that started coming out, and she said, oh my, it is real.
Yeah.
That is what happened to me.
It's very interesting to look back through, I suppose you might call it paranormal history, and find that these experiences don't just occur with the dying, but also with those in great physical trauma. For example, people who are under torture or a concentration camp inmates would sometimes report this. Have you gotten into that at all?
No, I haven't, but I heard an experience of a person in child abuse where the father had, tied them up to a fence and was beating them. He did this on a regular basis. I don't know how he's even existing, but would beat him, and to the point to where he left his body. And he would be out of his body in this wonderful, safe place while he was going through that, and then come back. And he said that's what saved him, was that he escaped that for a while. And he had, the story is horrific. But, yes, it does happen to other people as well. We barely, I think, have a clue of what all is going on many levels.
Oh, I agree. Well, the motto of the show is everything you know is wrong. So, It's the first day of school. Well, no, I've heard similar stories as well. So ultimately, Becki, what, in your words, and you pretty much addressed this, but to sum it up, what do we learn from those who are dying? What have you learned, and what do we all learn?
I think what the dying have taught me is that we need to understand how precious and brief this part of the parallel is, and to enjoy it and embrace it, and to understand that we are here with great purpose. Too many of them come back and tell us that, that we are here to love, that we are here to learn, and that we need to be not so much about the physical value of anything around us, because you're not taking any of that with you. That's not, I had one lady that said that she went out to the funeral home to check out her casket ahead of time, and she said, Becki, there's no luggage racks out there on those. She said, you know what? She said, I think what we take with us is what's woven into the DNA of our soul, and that's how we treat each other. So this is what I get from people that share this with me. Understand that you are precious, you're beloved, and that the real part of you travels on, and on whether it's multiple planes, one plane, I don't have a clue about, I'm just not that smart about all that stuff. But what I do understand is enjoy what you're doing here, honor what you're doing here, and understand.
And respect each other.
Person. Be your authentic self. Don't be afraid to be your authentic self, and don't be afraid when it's time to transition.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Becki, Ben, do you have any more questions before?
Well, actually, yeah, I did have one other thing I was kind of curious about.
Yeah.
How do doctors react when you tell them of your experiences, if you ever have?
Yes, I have, because when I was a brand new oncology nurse and I had these things happening, I would talk to these doctors and they would just look at me wide-eyed. And, occasionally one of them would, if it was just the two of us, speak just a little bit about, that's very interesting. It was almost like they were afraid to commit to, or ask me more.
Yeah, that's what I used to get. They knew it all along, but they wouldn't talk about it to each other because they'd get in trouble.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what I felt.
It's true. Very good. Well, Becki, tell us about your book, your website, where people can get the book.
My book, Lady Hawk Publishing, is my website. You can go there. You can get the paperback and the digital. And you can also get my book, Transitions, A Nurse's Education About Life and Death. It's on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. And on my website, I have blogs, I have videos, audios, more stories about what patients have taught me. And I would really love for people to, just connect with me there.
Outstanding.
So what are you doing now? What's your next big obstacle?
Well, I'm getting ready to go back to Sedona to do a lecture with the New Heaven, New Earth Near-Death Experience group out there, October 9th, and do a book signing. I'm writing my next book because I have so many of these journals from these patients over 30 years. And, I'm visiting people at the bedside as a volunteer, and I'm also doing some chaplain work as well still.
Very good.
Oh, wow.
Okay, well, let us know when the next book comes out. We'll have you back on. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you.
Well, that's always nice to hear. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, folks, Becki Hawkins, LadyHawkPublishing.com. Okay. A lot of people have written in asking how our trip was. Ben and I were in Iceland and in England got back about a week ago exactly. And we were having, I should say a week ago yesterday.
Yeah.
And we, the highlights of the trip, for the sake of this audience, would be certainly we were in sort of a ancestral family castle, of the Courtenay family, to whom we are related. And, also we visited, the highlight of the trip was our talk that we gave in Eastern England in Suffolk, in the Rendlesham Forest vicinity. And longtime listeners know we have done well over 30 hours of on-air time with that case, which has been known as Britain's Roswell. We were really, really happy to meet Larry Warren, who was one of the prime witnesses in the 1980 UFO landings and interaction that occurred at that double NATO base in England. And I don't know if we have time to get into what happened, but we went Friday evening of the 21st with a group of people, a group of listeners from Eastern England, and with Larry and also the promoter of the event, Gordy Goodger, who was really great to us. And we had some interesting experiences there, especially Ben. The next day I went back. Ben didn't want to go back, but I went back and hiked the place. I think we must have walked 10 miles, but we saw all the sights. And there's some information on that in some of our podcasts from last night, and also on our Facebook page. There are a couple of pictures, my personal Facebook page, and that kind of reverberates on yours, I guess, if you're in it.
I suppose.
Yeah, so Paulino and Benny. So check it out. It's an interesting situation. So...
All right, so we have some announcements. We had a great time in Iceland and England, and we'd like to thank Larry Warren, and Gordy Goodger, and all the other folks in Woodbridge, England, for their that's not the right page, for their warm welcome and standing room only audience, although it was a small room, for our talk on September 22nd. So for our next event, my dad and I will be featured speakers at the All Hallows Eve Psychic Fair at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Warwick, Rhode Island on Sunday, October 28th. So watch for more info on those events and more at www.behindtheparanormal.com.
Okay, and we wanted to thank our producer, of course, Ben himself, this evening, back in the seat. Next week, the show will be preempted, I believe, by coverage of the local Autumn Fest event. Is that correct?
Oh, we're actually doing a show?
No, we're not.
Oh, yeah, then we're not.
Yeah.
So, no, we won't be here.
Coverage of that, all right. It's a big deal in Northern Rhode Island here, and we will be back live the following week.
All right, so on a regular CBS edition on October 7th, we'll welcome author, UFO hunter, and monster expert Frank Ficino for a talk based on his newly revised book, The Braxton County Monster, otherwise known as the Flatwoods Monster.
Right. And we'll leave you this evening with a thought from the French philosopher Albert Camus. Okay, all right. You will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. I thought that was kind of cool.
That definitely seems appropriate.
Yeah.
I kind of feel bad asking that question at the end because that doesn't really wrap it up well.
Well, perhaps not. Well, you're always welcome to pick the quotes, Mr. Ben.
No, not the quote. I meant the questions.
Oh, the questions.
Usually it's like you end with something. It's like, oh, well, let's end on a positive note. It's like, how do doctors feel about that?
Yeah,
Sounds like something
exactly.
I should have asked earlier, but I didn't think about it till now.
So anyway, we are glad to be home, and we do recommend that you check us out in Warwick on the 28th of October, and I think we'll go into hibernation after that for a few months. Because the trip to Iceland and England was really, really, really busy.
You also didn't mention the stay tuned for news for the Necronomicon Providence, the H.P. Lovecraft convention set for August 23rd through the 25th, 2013 in Providence. And we'll be keeping you updated on that, but we have to go. So thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.